My name is Arden, and the day my sister pushed me out of our restaurant felt like someone yanked the floor out from under me. We had dreamed of owning a place together since we were kids. We spent years planning everything: what the dishes would look like, how the lights should glow, even the warm smell of baked bread that we hoped people would remember long after they left. When we opened the doors 3 years ago, it felt like magic. Hard, sweaty, exhausting magic, but still magic. Back then, we were partners in every sense. We split shifts, shared ideas, and laughed through mistakes. Even when the freezer broke on our second weekend, we handled it together. I trusted her completely. But little by little, things changed. She started arriving late, then not showing up at all on some days. Staff came to me with complaints, but when I tried talking to her, she brushed me off. "I'm fine," she snapped, though her eyes were cold. Soon she began making decisions alone, changing suppliers, hiring her friends, firing people without warning. I felt pushed to the sidelines. But nothing hit me harder than the morning she looked me in the face and said, "Arden, don't come back. You're out." And just like that, everything we built cracked wide open. I stood there for a long moment, trying to understand what she had just said. My sister didn't even look upset. She looked sure. Like she had practiced the line in the mirror. I felt something in my chest twist. "You can't be serious," I said quietly. "I am," she answered. "The place runs better without you. You slow things down." Slow things down? I had written most of the menu. I handled every health inspection. I trained every new cook. I kept the kitchen clean enough to pass surprise checks without fear. But none of that mattered now. She had already made up her mind. When I walked out of the restaurant that day, the chefs looked confused, and a few servers whispered behind their hands. No one stopped me, though. My sister had made sure of that. The air outside felt too sharp. I stood on the sidewalk staring at the sign we had designed together. My hands shook with anger, sadness, and something else I didn't want to name yet: fear. What was I supposed to do now? The restaurant had been my whole life. But the strangest part was this: beneath all the hurt, I felt a small spark of something old. Something protective. Something dangerous. I still held the health permit. Only I could renew it. And without renewal, that restaurant had only days left. When I got home, I dropped onto the couch and stared at the wall. My phone buzzed nonstop, staff asking questions, vendors wanting invoices, and one message from my sister that said only, "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Harder for who? She had kicked me out of my own restaurant. I opened my laptop, pulled up the folder where I kept every document related to the health permit, and took a slow breath. I had been the one to apply for it. My name was printed on the official papers. Only I could update the renewal that was due at the end of the week. I knew the rules well. If the permit wasn't renewed, the health department would give the restaurant a short grace period, then shut it down. Fast. But I didn't want revenge. Not yet. I wanted answers first. Why had she pushed me out? What was really going on? I decided to visit the restaurant early the next morning, before opening, when she would be there alone. I needed to see her face when I asked her directly. I needed to hear her explain why she had turned into someone I didn't recognize. As I closed my laptop, I felt that spark inside me grow a little brighter. My sister thought she had all the power. She had forgotten who kept the place legal. I arrived at the restaurant just after sunrise. The windows were still foggy from the morning air, and the lights inside glowed softly. I unlocked the back door with the spare key I still had and stepped into the quiet kitchen. Everything looked the same: clean steel counters, the line of spices I measured out myself, the chopping boards arranged by color. But it didn't feel like mine anymore. My sister was sitting at the small office desk, typing. When she looked up and saw me, her whole face tightened. "You shouldn't be here." I need answers, I said. Why did you push me out? She leaned back in the chair, folding her arms. Because you hold everything too tight. This place could be bigger, but you don't let it grow. That's not true. I just don't cut corners. She rolled her eyes. Not cutting corners is slowing us down. We need cheaper suppliers. Faster cooking. Less inspection stress. My stomach turned. So this is about money? It's about control, she said. And I want it. Her words hit me like a slap. She didn't even hide it. She wanted the restaurant to be hers alone. For the first time, I saw something cold behind her eyes, a hunger that scared me more than her anger ever had. And I knew, right then, she wasn't going to stop. I walked out of the office without another word. I needed space to think, and the kitchen wasn't giving me any comfort. Everything felt wrong. The fridge door seal was cracked. A box of raw chicken sat too close to the vegetables. A dirty cloth hung over a counter where bread dough should have been resting. Had things been slipping like this while I was still here and I just hadn't noticed? Or had she become careless after pushing me out? Either way, it meant trouble. I stepped outside and stood in the alley, letting the cold air calm my mind. I pulled out my phone and opened the health permit file again. My renewal appointment was in 2 days. If I didn't show up, the restaurant wouldn't have a legal permit after the grace period. 72 hours. That's how long they would last after the permit expired. I didn't want to destroy the place we built. But she had already destroyed what mattered most, our trust, our partnership, our dream. For the rest of the day, I walked around town thinking about everything. By sunset, I knew what I had to do. If she wanted full control, she could have it. But she would have to run the restaurant without the one thing she never respected, the rules that kept it open. The next morning, I woke up early, even though I had barely slept. My mind kept replaying everything my sister said in that office. She didn't want teamwork. She didn't want fairness. She wanted control, even if it meant cutting corners that could hurt people. That scared me more than losing the restaurant. I sat at my small kitchen table with a cup of tea and stared at the calendar. 2 days until the renewal appointment. I had never missed one. I had been the reason the place stayed spotless during every surprise inspection. I knew the inspectors by name, and they trusted me because I followed every rule. Now my sister was risking it all, our dream, our work, our reputation, just so she could say she ran the place alone. By late morning, I decided to visit one more person before making my final choice. Mr. Callow, the health inspector with the tired eyes and calm voice. He had watched our restaurant grow from a tiny idea to a popular spot. He knew how hard I worked. When I reached his office, he greeted me with a warm smile. But when I told him what had happened, that smile faded. He leaned forward and listened closely, his brow tightening. Arden, he said softly, you need to make a decision based on what's safe, not what feels fair. Those words hit deeper than I expected. I left the health department with my thoughts twisting like storm clouds. Safety. Fairness. Responsibility. All of it weighed heavily on me. I walked slowly down the sidewalk, passing the bakery, the bookstore, the place where we used to buy our spices. Every part of town held a memory connected to the restaurant. By the time I reached the park, I felt drained. I sat on a bench near the pond, watching ducks glide across the water. Everything looked peaceful, but inside me, nothing felt still. My sister and I had started the restaurant when I was barely out of school. I worked long nights, saved every extra dollar, and spent months studying food safety. She was good with people, good at charm, good at the front of house. Together, we balanced each other. At least, that's what I believed. But now I wondered if she had always seen the place as hers, with me as a convenient helper. I put my face in my hands. The truth hurt more than the betrayal. She wasn't just pushing me out of a job. She was pushing me out of a life we built together. When I lifted my head, the sun was starting to sink behind the trees. I took a deep breath. If she wanted full control, fine. But she also needed to take full responsibility. And I wasn't going to shield her anymore. The next day, I woke up calmer. Not happy, but steady, like a decision inside me had finally settled into place. I dressed, tied my hair back, and headed to the renewal appointment, not to complete it, but to talk. Mr. Callow greeted me again, this time with a knowing expression. "You're certain?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "I won't be renewing the permit." He nodded slowly, as if he had expected this. "Then the department will follow the usual process. After the grace period, they'll receive a closure notice." There was no turning back after that. On the walk home, I felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because the decision was made. Heavier because of what would follow. That afternoon, I returned to the restaurant once more, not to argue, but to observe. I walked in as a customer and took a seat near the kitchen door. My sister noticed me but didn't come over. I watched staff move in rushed, messy ways I had never allowed. I saw a server carry raw produce under his arm. I saw a cook wipe his hands on his apron and then touch plated food. My heart sank. This wasn't the place we built anymore. She had turned it into something I barely recognized. That night, my sister called for the first time since she kicked me out. Her voice was sharp, almost shaking. "Did you skip the renewal appointment?" I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch until she finally said, "Arden, this isn't funny." "It wasn't a joke," I said. "You told me the restaurant didn't need me. So now you get to run it without me. You're being dramatic." "No," I replied softly. "I'm being honest. You made your choice." She let out a harsh breath. "You're going to ruin everything." "I'm not ruining anything," I said. "I'm just refusing to cover for you anymore." Her anger burst through the phone. She called me selfish, stubborn, ungrateful. She blamed me for every struggle the restaurant ever had. I listened quietly until she finally stopped. "You kicked me out," I said at last. "All I'm doing is staying out." She hung up on me. For a moment, the quiet in my apartment felt strange, too big, too empty. But then something unexpected happened. I realized I wasn't shaking anymore. I wasn't scared. I wasn't confused. For the first time since she pushed me out, I felt strong. And I knew the next 3 days would change everything. The first day after the permit deadline passed, I tried to distract myself. I cleaned my apartment, made soup, even watched a cooking show. But part of me kept imagining what was happening at the restaurant. I pictured my sister pacing, snapping at the staff, pretending everything was fine while the clock ticked down. By the second day, I got a message from an old coworker. "Things feel weird here. She's panicking." I didn't reply. I didn't want to make anyone take sides. On the third day, the last day, my stomach felt tight all morning. I knew that around noon, the health department would send the closure notice. They always did it during business hours so the public could see the posting. At exactly 1:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. A picture appeared on my screen. The front door of the restaurant. A bright orange sign taped to the glass. Temporarily closed, permit expired. I stared at it for a long time. I expected to feel triumph or anger or maybe even guilt. But what I felt was something quieter. Relief. Not because the place closed, but because the truth was finally visible. My sister had taken everything for granted, even the rules that kept the doors open. And without those rules, and without me, she had only lasted 72 hours. I thought the closure would be the end of it, but it only started a new wave of noise. By evening, my phone lit up again and again with messages from people I barely knew. Some wanted gossip. Some wanted to blame me. Others asked if I was coming back to fix it. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I took a quiet walk around my neighborhood. I passed small shops, little cafes, and families eating dinner by their windows. Everything felt normal out there, while my world felt twisted on its side. When I reached the corner where our restaurant stood, I stopped across the street. My sister was inside, yelling at someone. Even with the glass doors closed, her anger looked loud. Staff members stood around with confused faces. A few customers tried to open the door, saw the sign, and walked away shaking their heads. My chest ached. I remembered the first day we opened, how proud she and I had been, how we hugged in the kitchen while the ovens warmed up. Now, watching her through the glass, she looked like a stranger wearing my sister's face. I didn't stay long. I turned around and walked home, reminding myself that I hadn't caused this. She had. The next morning, my sister banged on my apartment door so hard that I jumped. When I opened it, she pushed past me and stormed inside like she owned the place. "You're going to the health department today," she said. "You're fixing this." "No," I said calmly, even though my hands trembled. She spun around to face me. Her eyes were wild, her hair messy like she hadn't slept. "You owe me." "I owe you?" I repeated. "You kicked me out. You told me the restaurant didn't need me. You can't change your mind now just because things went wrong." She threw her hands up. "Customers are yelling, staff are quitting, vendors want answers. I can't do this alone." "You didn't want to do it with me," I replied. She stared at me for a long time, breathing hard, like she was trying to force me to feel guilty. But something inside me had changed. Her words no longer controlled me the way they once did. "Finally," she said, "if the restaurant dies, it'll be your fault." I shook my head. "No. It'll be yours. You took away the one thing keeping it safe." For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. She just stood there, silent and shocked, like the truth had finally cracked through her anger. After she left, I sat on the floor beside my couch, hugging my knees. It wasn't easy hearing her blame me, even when I knew she was wrong. A part of me still remembered the days when we trusted each other, when we laughed over burned soup or danced around the kitchen during slow nights. Losing that bond hurt more than losing the restaurant. By afternoon, I forced myself to go outside for fresh air. As I walked down the street, I ran into people who used to be regular customers. A few asked what happened. A few whispered. A few looked at me with pity. I answered only the simplest things: "I'm not part of it anymore." But then I met someone who surprised me, Mr. Callow, the health inspector. He stood outside a small deli, sipping coffee. He saw me and gave a gentle nod. "Rough few days?" he asked. I let out a slow breath. "Yeah." He thought for a moment, then said something that stuck with me: "Sometimes a place has to close before something better can open." I didn't know if he meant the restaurant or the relationship with my sister. Maybe both. As I walked away, I realized something important: the closure wasn't just an ending. It was the start of something I hadn't imagined yet. That evening, I got a call from someone I didn't expect, one of our longtime cooks, Mateo. He was quiet, steady, and always followed the rules. If anyone understood what I went through, it was him. "Arden," he said, "I'm sorry about everything. None of us knew what she was planning. The kitchen has been chaos without you." I pressed the phone closer to my ear. "I'm sorry you're dealing with that." He hesitated, then said, "Some of us want to leave. We miss how things were before. Not perfect, but safe." His voice was gentle, almost hopeful, and it reminded me of something I had pushed aside: my love for cooking, for building a place where people felt welcome. Have you thought about starting something new? He asked. The question stunned me. I hadn't let myself dream that far. I'd been busy surviving, grieving, staying strong. I don't know, I whispered. I'm not sure I can. But a tiny part of me wondered if I really couldn't, or if I was just scared. If you ever do, he said, some of us would follow you. After the call, I sat on my bed with my phone in my hand, thinking about all the possibilities I had ignored. Maybe my story wasn't ending. Maybe it was shifting. The next day, the restaurant's front window was covered with newspaper. Someone had taped them sloppily from the inside. It was clear my sister didn't want people peeking in. I heard she had yelled at 2 reporters who tried to ask questions. I didn't go near the place. I didn't need to. Instead, I walked to the library, where I used to study food safety late into the night. Sitting at a wooden table by the window, I opened my notebook, one I hadn't touched in months. It was filled with old recipe ideas, sketches of new layouts, even dreams I had forgotten I wrote down. As I flipped through the pages, something warm filled my chest. Not anger. Not sadness. Hope. I didn't know what my sister would do now. Maybe she would try to sell the restaurant. Maybe she would try to reopen it somehow. Maybe she would come back begging again. But for the first time, none of that felt like my responsibility. I turned to a blank page in my notebook and wrote 3 simple words. Start from scratch. The idea scared me, but it also excited me. For years, I had built everything around my sister. Now, for once, I wondered what I could build for myself. I spent the next morning sitting on my living room floor with my old recipe books spread around me. Some were stained with oil spots and tiny smudges of herbs. They smelled like years of work, years of learning, years of dreams I once shared with my sister. For a long time, I just touched the pages, remembering. As I flipped through one book, I found a handwritten note tucked inside. It wasn't from my sister. It was from my grandmother, written long before the restaurant ever existed. Cook with honesty. Build with care. Food holds truth better than people do. I read the note again and again. My grandmother had been the reason I started cooking. She taught me how small details mattered, how clean work meant respect, and how every meal carried a little piece of the person who made it. I suddenly realized something. The restaurant had stopped feeling honest long before my sister kicked me out. The tension, the shortcuts, the rushed choices, they had all chipped away at the heart of what we built. Maybe losing it wasn't just punishment. Maybe it was release. As that thought settled inside me, the fear I carried for days slowly loosened. For the first time since the closure, I felt like breathing came easier. Maybe I truly could begin again. Later that afternoon, I walked to a quiet cafe near the river. I ordered a tea and sat by the window, watching sunlight shimmer across the water. The calmness helped me think clearly. I pulled out my notebook again and started writing ideas, not for the old restaurant, but for something new. A small place with fresh ingredients. A safe kitchen. A team that respected each other. A menu that didn't chase trends but focused on heart and flavor. I wrote down colors for the walls, names for dishes, even possible locations. I didn't realize how long I had been writing until someone tapped my shoulder. It was Mateo. His apron was dusted with flour, and he looked tired but hopeful. Mind if I sit? He asked. I nodded, surprised but glad he had found me. He glanced at my notebook. Planning something new? Maybe, I said honestly. I'm not sure yet. He leaned forward. If you do it, Arden, you'll do it right. And people will notice. His confidence in me warmed something inside my chest. We talked for almost an hour, about food, safety, ideas, and even fears. By the time he left, I felt steadier. Starting over still felt huge. But I wasn't alone. Not completely. And that made a difference I hadn't expected. News about the restaurant spread through town faster than I expected. Some people blamed my sister. Some blamed me. Some just wanted to know the whole story, which I wasn't willing to share. I kept quiet and let the storm move around me. One afternoon, while I was walking home from the grocery store, an older woman stopped me. She used to eat at the restaurant every Sunday afternoon. "Dear," she said gently, "I'm sorry things turned out this way. You always ran that kitchen with grace. Don't lose yourself over one broken partnership." Her words felt like a hand on my shoulder, steady, comforting. I thanked her and kept walking, feeling touched in a way I hadn't expected. When I reached my apartment, I found an envelope taped to my door. Inside was a short letter from one of the servers who had quit 2 days earlier. "Thank you for teaching me the right way to work. I hope you open something new. If you do, I'll be there on the first day." I sat on my couch holding the letter, surprised by how much it meant. I had spent so much time thinking I had failed that I forgot the influence I had on others. Maybe the restaurant had fallen apart. But I hadn't. The next morning, I woke up with a strange mix of nerves and energy buzzing inside me. I opened my notebook again and stared at the blank page I had written on a few days ago. Start from scratch. The words no longer looked scary. They looked like a door. I began planning more seriously, looking up small rental spaces, making a list of equipment I would need, checking costs. It was overwhelming, but the good kind. The kind that meant I was building something real. Halfway through the afternoon, my phone rang. It was my sister. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Her voice sounded tired, almost defeated. "The building owner won't let me reopen without a new permit. They said they won't approve anything until you're involved." "That's between you and them," I said softly. "I need you to fix this," she insisted. "Just come back. Help me get the place open again." I closed my eyes. The plea in her voice stirred old memories, old loyalties. But I remembered the messy kitchen, the broken trust, the way she pushed me out like I didn't matter. "I'm not coming back," I said. "I'm moving on." There was silence, long, heavy, cold. Then she hung up. And, strangely, I felt free. By evening, I decided to take one last walk past the old restaurant, not out of sadness, but to close a chapter. The windows were still covered. A few chairs were stacked inside, dusty and forgotten. It looked nothing like the lively place we once loved. I stood there for a minute, letting myself feel everything: loss, anger, hope, and even a small piece of peace. The restaurant had been my world for years. But it wasn't my future anymore. As I turned to leave, I saw a small group of staff members watching me from across the street. Mateo was one of them. Another cook. A server I trained last year. They didn't come over. They just nodded, quietly, respectfully. It felt like a goodbye, but also like a promise. I walked home slowly, feeling lighter with each step. The night air was cool, and the city lights shimmered like tiny sparks. For the first time in a long time, my heart didn't feel crushed. It felt open. Whatever came next wouldn't be easy. Starting something new never was. But I knew one thing for sure. I was ready. Not for revenge. Not for blame. For rebuilding. For rediscovering myself. For a life where I chose the path, not followed someone else's shadow. The next week felt different, quieter, but in a good way. I spent my mornings walking along the river, letting my mind settle, and my afternoons planning. I looked at rental spaces online, compared prices, and even visited 2 small storefronts. One was too cramped. The other smelled like old paint. But the third one made my heart lift the moment I stepped inside. It was small but bright, with a wide front window and clean tile floors. It had the kind of warmth that welcomed you before you even imagined the decor. I walked from corner to corner, picturing a counter here, a long shelf of spices there, and maybe a chalkboard menu on the back wall. The landlord, a soft-spoken man named Theo, told me the place had been empty for almost a year. When I said I cooked professionally, his eyes brightened. "This spot needs life again," he said. "And good food." I didn't sign anything yet, but I left with a copy of the lease and a fluttering excitement I hadn't felt in months. That night, I sat in bed reading through the papers. The numbers scared me. The commitment scared me. The unknown scared me. But losing myself scared me more. I folded the papers and placed them on my nightstand. Maybe this was where my future would start. The next morning, my apartment felt too silent, so I invited Matteo and 2 other former coworkers, Lonnie and Priya, over to talk. They arrived carrying snacks, notebooks, and hopeful expressions that made my heart warm. We sat around my kitchen table like we used to during staff meetings, only this time, the energy was calm instead of rushed. I showed them the photos of the rental space, expecting uncertainty or hesitation. Instead, all 3 of them leaned forward, studying every detail. "It's small, but it has charm," Priya said. "And good light," Lonnie added. "Good light makes food look honest." Matteo nodded toward me. "It fits you, Arden." I felt my throat tighten. "It fits what I want to build," I admitted. "Something safe. Something real. Something we don't have to fight for every day." They exchanged glances. Then Matteo asked the question that surprised me even though I had hoped for it. "If you open this place, can we join you?" My breath caught. "You'd work with me again?" "Work with," he corrected. "Not under." "With." Their faith in me hit deep. We talked for over an hour about roles, schedules, and the kind of environment we wanted. Respect. Clean work. Honest cooking. When they left, my kitchen felt full of possibility. The kind that whispered, "You can do this." 2 days later, I signed the lease. My hands shook a little as I wrote my name, not from fear but from the weight of what it meant. The landlord handed me the keys with a warm smile and said, "Make something wonderful here." I spent the rest of the day in the empty space, sweeping dust, opening windows, and letting sunlight pour in. It felt peaceful, like the room had been waiting patiently for someone to bring it back to life. By the afternoon, Matteo and the others showed up with cleaning supplies and music. We scrubbed walls, wiped down counters, and laughed as we uncovered old stains in weird places. It reminded me of the early days of the other restaurant, only this time, the air felt lighter. While cleaning, I stepped outside for a moment to throw away a box. That's when I saw my sister standing across the street. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't angry. She just stood there, staring at the sign on my door. Our eyes met. For a moment, I remembered everything we built together. Then I remembered everything she broke. She walked toward me slowly. I braced myself, unsure what she would say. Instead, she whispered, "So this is it, your new start?" I nodded. "Yes. It is." She looked down, silent. And for once, I didn't feel the need to fill the space between us. My sister didn't apologize. I didn't expect her to. Instead, she gave a small nod, almost like surrender, then walked away without another word. Watching her go felt strange, sad, but also freeing. A door had closed, and for once, I wasn't standing in the doorway hoping it would open again. Inside the shop, the others noticed my expression but didn't pry. Instead, Matteo handed me a cloth and said, "We still need to wipe down the back shelves." His timing was perfect. It grounded me. We worked until evening, transforming the dusty space into something welcoming. When the sun began to set, the golden light stretched across the room, making the clean surfaces glow. I stood in the doorway, imagining customers sitting by the windows, sharing meals filled with care. After everyone left, I stayed a little longer, alone in the quiet space that would soon become a dream reborn. I sat on the floor and leaned against the wall, feeling the slow rhythm of calm settling inside me. This place wasn't large. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't perfect. But it was mine. For the first time in a long time, I felt steady, like my feet stood on solid ground instead of broken pieces. And I knew I wasn't rebuilding out of anger. I was rebuilding out of hope. Opening day came 2 months later. The small sign over the door read Arden's Hearth. Simple, warm, honest, exactly what I wanted. When we unlocked the door that morning, a small line of people waited outside. Regulars. Old coworkers. Curious neighbors. Even the older woman who used to eat at the old restaurant every Sunday. Inside, the kitchen buzzed with calm energy. Mateo's steady hands worked the oven, Lonnie plated dishes with care, and Priya handled customers with a smile that made everyone feel welcome. When the first order came through, my heart raced the same way it did on the very first day of my life in the food world. But this time, the pressure felt different. It wasn't fear. It was joy. As the day went on, the room filled with laughter, warm smells, and the soft clatter of plates. People complimented the food, the atmosphere, the kindness. Some told me they were glad I didn't give up. Near closing time, I stood by the doorway, watching the last customers leave. Sunset painted the windows gold, and my chest felt full of pride, full of peace, full of something I thought I'd lost forever. I had been pushed out of a partnership. But I had stepped into something better. Something honest. Something mine. And in that moment, I knew, the best things in life don't always survive. But they can be rebuilt, stronger, cleaner, and truer than before.